I'm kind of.
Okay, if I can have your attention, we'll get started here in a moment. One of the fun things about this conference is the quality and diversity of speakers is always so robust and dynamic. It's hard to pack it all in one day, but that quality continues now. I hope you'll agree with our next speaker, Commissioner Gil Kerlikowske. It's my great privilege to introduce the Commissioner to all of you. His bio is in your materials, and so I won't spend a ton of time except to say that the Commissioner has a very long and distinguished career as a public servant in law enforcement at the state and local level, as well as at the federal level across a number of administrations. I had the pleasure of serving with the Commissioner as a colleague at the White House with President Obama when he was the head of the Office of the National Drug Control Office, and then, of course, when I was over at Commerce and he assumed his new responsibilities. So, Commissioner, welcome, and thank you for once again taking time to be with us.
Of course.
What we're going to do this morning, the topic of our program here, of our session, is managing the border for security and competitiveness. And what I'd like to do is ask the Commissioner to make some opening remarks, share with you his current priorities and vision of his agency and his responsibilities, and I'll ask a handful of questions, and we'll turn it open to the audience for some additional questions.
Good. Let me just make a couple opening remarks. Since I was here a year ago, there has been so much progress and so many positive things have happened during that time when it comes to commerce and opening. I'm very privileged to see Dr. Alcacer here, who we worked very closely with on a number of border security issues, including the border violence issues, which really impacted communities on both sides of the border when incidents had occurred. We took a number of steps together, both governments, in improving relationships, improving communications, frankly, improving transparency on the issues of border violence. And when we just recently, with the federal police and Comisionado Galindo, did an incredible performance with young children in Reynosa, with wonderful musical presentations, etc. Both law enforcement agencies together in Reynosa. And then the very next day to be in McAllen at McAllen High School, and both myself as commissioner and Comisionado Galindo to be able to answer questions from high school students about border security. And when residents and the representatives of business on both sides of the border recognize and have confidence in those law enforcement entities, and along with the fact that both organizations being more open and more transparent, I think that's helpful. I think that's helpful to commerce. To be a part of the Tijuana crossing for the airport, to be at the ribbon cutting with commerce and many other representatives, again, on both sides of the border, for the first rail crossing in 100 years, to have such a good working relationship when it comes to being able to not have redundant security efforts, but to have that trust in that relationship with the law enforcement entities, but also certainly SAT and aduanas when it comes to helping to move cargo through more quickly and more efficiently. Just one positive thing after another when it comes to travel, when it comes to trade. And look what's already on the agenda and the things that are happening. Those vast improvements in San Ysidro when it comes to the infrastructure changes. What will happen with Otay Mesa? I know you have had a number of speakers and to listen a little bit at the end to Senator Flake on the issues that are important for commerce with the Arizona. So whether it's California, New Mexico, Arizona, or certainly Texas, there have been vast improvements both in relationships, communication, border security, but also with that understanding and clear recognition that trade and travel is absolutely critical and is only becoming more critical and more important. And our partners in commerce, our partners at the White House on these issues are just are very important to us. And on behalf of Secretary Johnson, who was in Laredo for the ribbon cutting and the work that has gone on there, it is just one more positive step. That's all within the last year.
Terrific. So, Commissioner, I thought maybe we'd try to have a bit of a fireside charla, to put it in Mexican terms, to get beyond the usual talking points and to give this group, which is, I think, deeply knowledgeable about the border, that's come repeatedly to Washington for these types of events, to try to get into some of the issues that that I think are really at the core of what people care about. We've heard a lot today in the speakers prior to this panel about this challenge and the evolution of the U.S.-Mexico relationship in balancing the competing missions of security and commerce. And of course, CBP is at the front line, literally, of that effort. So let me just start by asking you how you view that balance as commissioner, but more importantly, if you'd be a little introspective and self-critical, how you'd grade your own agency in the last, at least in this administration, through your current tenure, on striking that balance. And in particular, I think one of the things that I heard when I was in government, and I hear as I make my way across the border, is that that there's a cultural mindset, kind of paradigm shift that still is lacking. That there's political leadership that has the vision, but that at the level of ports of entry, at the on site, you still have sort of a little bit of lag in the agency viewing itself and its mission, not just as being focused on security, but also on promoting trade and commerce. So talk a little bit about that, how you instill that cultural change in the agency.
So CBP, since 2003, when it was formed, we just recently, in February, when the President signed our authorization. So we've always been, for those of you inside the Beltway, we've always been appropriated and had a very good relationship with Congress when it comes to appropriations. We have never been authorized. And so all of our authorities and regulations were in a variety of places. The Customs Service having been part of Treasury, the United States Border Patrol having been part of the Department of Justice. To actually have the authorization under the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act has been very helpful to us. Also, because of our dual mission of border security and the facilitation of lawful trade and travel, we actually don't see these as competing or mutually exclusive. We see the fact that we want to work closely with our travel partners, the airline industry, bus, commerce, et cetera, and we want to work closely certainly with trade partners and international trade partners. Regardless of the number of people and the amount of technology on the border, which I think there isn't anyone in this audience that would not say has been plussed up significantly, there isn't anyone that doesn't recognize that if you don't have trusted relationships and partners, whether it's in CT-PAT, whether it's in Sentry programs for trusted travelers, all of those things mean that we have to work closely together, and we have to make sure that, one, we understand and recognize the important mission that we have when it comes to border security, but we also recognize and understand the important mission that we have when it comes to our nation's economic security, and frankly, the economic security in Mexico. If you look at those numbers of immigration numbers, you certainly clearly see a continuing minimal numbers of people trying to enter the United States illegally from Mexico that are citizens of Mexico, that are from Mexico. We often see the fact that because Mexico's economy, because regardless of how you attempt to look at crime issues, whether it's in our country or in the government within Mexico, if a community is safer and the economy is better and people have a better opportunity for education, then in fact there is less of an attempt to enter some other country for any of those benefits. And yet in those 3 Central American countries that you're all very familiar with, on our unaccompanied children, et cetera, some of those same benefits don't exist. So when we have a better focus on economic security, and Mexico does, when we work more closely hand in hand, it means that there's more prosperity, and frankly, there's better safety and security for both countries, and that means we get to fulfill both our missions.
And how would you, as I asked, how would you grade, if you were being self-critical, how would you grade the agency and its performance in achieving that dual mission?
Oh, I thought I sidestepped that. I worked hard. I think that after 9/11, without question, in the formation during what would be called, I think, the storming and norming period, but certainly the storming period, the formation of Customs and Border Protection, bringing together these different organizations, the United States Customs Service, 227 years old, the United States Border Patrol, 92 years old, and how do you fit them all together? All of the focus was on security, and I don't think as much attention and recognition for economic security was there. I would say that particularly with the work that Alan Burson did when he served in this position, and I'm very fortunate, although I think it speaks about Roberta Jacobson, our ambassador, to go 9 months without a confirmed ambassador to a country that we are so closely aligned with. When I leave office, unless something happens between now and the end of the year, when I leave office, I will have been the only commissioner confirmed by the United States Senate. And frankly, that's quite helpful. So I would say that the recognition of always putting primary importance, the importance of border security, I would give our organization a B+. And a lot of that is a result of not only increased cooperation and communication, but frankly, huge, significant investments in personnel and technology on the border. I think that our recognition and help on economic issues in trade, we're probably closer to a C+. But we have people like our political appointee, Maria Luisa Boyce, who is in the front row and lives and breathes trade every day, and is probably known individually to so many of you for the work that she and her part of our organization at CBP have done to improve those levels of cooperation and trade. So we're doing better, and as we always say here inside the Beltway, more can be done.
Terrific. Thank you. And thanks for that honest view. I think one of the things that we've also heard about today, I think, in addition to this challenge of striking that balance and getting it right, is the changed nature over the recent years of cooperation, bilateral cooperation between the United States and Mexico, having gone from a place where we kind of both do our own thing to an era where we view the border as a shared responsibility and a source of shared prosperity. Now that perspective, sadly, is not always articulated, and is not always the prevailing one, but I think among policy leaders, at least, that's certainly, I think, a perspective that is embraced. So perhaps, Commissioner, you could talk a little bit about how you view the state of cooperation between the United States and Mexico. And I'd ask you to address it at 2 levels. One is at the political level in Washington and Mexico City, where obviously we have structured dialogues and strategic engagements with our counterparts in Mexico City on both sides of the border. And then also at the field level, because again, I think there's sometimes a difference between what our political leaders say and intend and what gets manifested at the ground level. So perhaps a word about the current state of U.S.-Mexico cooperation, and let me throw in the kicker, all this campaign rhetoric that's circulating. Are you perceiving that changing anything in the cooperation with Mexico or in the dynamic with our Mexican partners?
Well, I think the elected officials and the high-level appointed officials in the government of Mexico kind of recognize, as Senator Flake mentioned, the heat of the campaign, and it'll only be the heat of the campaign now through November. I've worked very hard to, one, stay out of politics, and number two, to make sure that I try my very best to keep Customs and Border Protection out of politics. But that doesn't mean that I'll be silent, and have not been silent, or will not be silent on the issues that affect our relationship. At the highest levels, whether it's in the law enforcement to law enforcement, justice to justice, commerce to commerce, or Customs and Border Protection with both Customs and the security officials in Mexico, at the highest levels, I could not think that there would, and I've dealt with this issue when I was in the White House also, as you, I don't think that we could have any more warm, trusting relationships and cooperation than we have right now. But as many of you in the room know, all the work gets done at the local level. What happens across the border with Tijuana? What happens across the border with at Brownsville and Matamoros and Reynosa and McAllen? And those relationships are very, very good. We have joint patrols in which we communicate actively with federal law enforcement officials through encrypted or protected networks to make sure that we're addressing the issues, that we're working hard to address the issues together. In Tijuana, all you have to do is to go and see that wonderful facility in which we are standing side by side with the government of Mexico, inspecting those truckloads of produce, none of which we would have had fresh produce this last winter if it wasn't in large part for what was imported from Mexico. Standing there side by side, reducing the redundant inspections, and to see our agriculture inspectors who work so hard to make sure that our agriculture industry is protected from both from pests and disease, to sharing the same room and our scientists sitting with the scientists from the government of Mexico. That reduces time, it improves things greatly, and I think that those things are just very, very positive. We don't do the dual inspections of these trains coming through Matamoros and Brownsville because Mexico does the inspections through the X-ray equipment, through the non-intrusive inspection devices, and gives us the images. So they're not inspecting things on one side, and then it's coming over, and everything's being held up, and now we're inspecting things on the other side. So it couldn't be better, I think, and I spent a lot of time on that border. Couldn't be better at the local level, could not be better at the highest levels of government officials.
So given the success that you're seeing with these pre-inspection programs, the pre-clearance programs, some of these pilots that have been deployed at key border crossings, what's the prognosis for expanding those and transforming them from pilots to the standard norm, the normal way of doing business across the border?
Yeah, I think that we need to carefully evaluate and see how things are working, where there may be glitches, where we may need to make changes. But if you think about the Tijuana example, as you know, our Customs and Border Protection personnel are armed. And there was always a very significant issue about, our armed personnel from the United States going to be working in that sovereign territory just outside the border. And yet, under President Pena and the legislature of Mexico, the elected members, in this very narrow role, that has been accomplished. And it's been accomplished to, one, the benefit of the security of both countries. It's also been accomplished to the benefit of commerce to both countries.
But given that these programs are operating successfully, I mean, isn't there a strong case that they should be expanded more quickly than not?
I think there is a strong case. I think that, again, listening to a little bit as Senator Flake talked about, this is a very difficult time right now in rhetoric and discussion, but particularly one on immigration issues and number two on border security issues. But I think that more can be accomplished as we look at the successes of these pilot programs. I would not expect significant changes between now and then. And remember, some of these pilots that are going on are still under evaluation. But there's nothing that I would see in the future that is going to inhibit expansion and discussion around some of these. And San Ysidro's probably Otay Mesa, as Gary. I think Gary Gallegos was.
He was here earlier.
Okay. Yeah, a number of other people that we've worked with. I think those things are going to continue on.
I know a big theme, in addition to pre-inspection and pre-clearance, is this concept, which is related to pre-clearance, of moving the border back off of the border. This idea of creating these secure corridors that would allow the packaging of materials, the loading onto trucks or trains, and allowing expedited access and movement from a point deep in the interior, say of the Bajío in Mexico, transporting it, say, to Chicago without having to stop at the border. What's your thinking on the viability of those initiatives, the state of thinking around them, the deployment of pilots around them, and how far off are we from seeing that from being a reality in the bilateral relationship?
So I think some of the experiments that have been in conjunction with Customs and Border Protection and the United States government and this is all about technology. It's all about secure platforms. It's all about being able to make sure that that truck or that train cargo is not being tampered with, not being stopped along those routes. I think that the North American Leaders Conference, they have discussed certainly at staff levels the importance of being able to see products and produce and other things from Mexico that are not just that are transited through the United States and into Canada. I think those are great visions. I think that we have to look very carefully at what the technology can actually produce. But I would see that there's going to be further discussion and further development in that area.
Your comment brings to mind, at least to me, this idea of North American thinking in our policy planning and our law enforcement discussions and our collaboration. To what extent is that concept? I mean, we heard, I can't recall who it was, maybe it was Alan Burson or one of our other panelists earlier, but there's been a lot of discussion about the North Americanization, if you will, of our policy agenda. How much do you see that kind of thinking taking root in CBP? I mean, at a real level, not just conceptual, where somebody, like some Assistant Secretary of Commerce or something, throws it out in a speech or mentions it at an HLED meeting, but at the level of operational planning in CBP, is this something that's embraced by CBP's rank and file leadership? And if not, what do we need to get them to move to that vision?
So I would say it is embraced by that rank and file leadership. I look at the people that run our CTPAT, our cargo systems, looking at the people that run Global Entry and of course also manage Sentry and Nexus programs. There is no question in my mind that they see the value and the benefit of continuing this, both from their security viewpoint, because that increased cooperation and communication leads to better security, but also for the fact that this is about jobs, it's about the economy, it's about the future of an area of the world. And I think we're very fortunate right now at the World Customs Organization, where we'll be in July, to have Ana Hinojosa as one of the 5 elected members, where we have not had an American elected in over a dozen years, as one of the 5 elected members for a 5-year period in a directorate. She was a port director on the Mexico border with the United States. She served as a deputy assistant commissioner in our international affairs, and to have 89 member countries of WCO elect her, what a wonderful voice at the world level, at the global level of WCO in Brussels. What a wonderful voice to have about not just that border, but also the Western Hemisphere issues. So I see a lot of discussion, a lot of progress in that area.
Terrific. So we can't really be intellectually honest in talking about these challenges and these visions and these opportunities if we don't talk about resources. Senator Flake was mentioning that in his remarks you might have heard that that CBP has been authorized, and he didn't say appropriated, he said authorized. I assume it was appropriated as well, to hire 2,000 additional blue shirts, of which only, I think, less than half have actually been hired. He mentioned that CBP has shared with him that it takes 100 applicants to fill one position on average. Say a little bit about the challenge of building a 21st century workforce for CBP, and what can be done to help to build a more robust pipeline?
Well, Congress appropriated for us several years ago the additional 2,000 Customs and Border Protection officers. It was based upon a very good piece of research done, I believe, out of USC that basically said that for every Customs and Border Protection officer at a port of entry that you add, and that you reduce either wait times for travel or you reduce wait times for cargo on our just-in-time supply chains, for every person you add, you actually make money for this country, even with the expenditure of those individuals. Out of those 2,000, I think we're about 750 to 800 people short. It has been a very difficult time in many organizations for hiring. I think we have about 1,200 openings in the United States Border Patrol. Applications, by the way, are available at the back. Because we have stringent hiring requirements. We work very hard to get the best people. The training requirements are also significant. But many law enforcement agencies at the federal, state, and local level are having difficulty hiring and filling positions right now. And these are good jobs. So we are doing a lot of recruiting. We've reduced the wait time. We have 3 recruiters in Texas at Fort Bliss right now as the Army reduces its size. With their backgrounds and experience and training, they make excellent Customs and Border Protection officers or agents of the United States Border Patrol. So we have to work very hard to continue to improve the hiring process and to get people on board. Good jobs with good salaries, good benefits. Difficult and challenging, but we work hard at it.
How critical, just as you sit as commissioner and think about the challenges that the agency faces, how critical is staffing shortages? I mean, where does that rank on the hierarchy of things that keep you up at night or things that you worry about as commissioner?
So the staffing shortages are significant because with all of the technology and all of the improvements both in border security and cargo screening and on, we also clearly recognize that this is in many ways it's a labor-intensive business. In many ways, it's kind of about boots on the ground also. We need to get people and cargo through those ports of entry. We need to work as expeditiously as possible to do that because of people wanting that just-in-time supply chain. They don't want a warehouse and they don't want to spend the money to warehouse parts and equipment and on. They want to deliver it on time, and that's why we also need our people. The other issue has been the explosion of e-commerce. Huge increases in e-commerce, both international mail and air cargo through private carriers. E-commerce with the change in de minimis from $200 to $800 presents a certain amount of risk when it comes to us being able to collect funding that is due the United States. So those things are also critical and important. So I would say that it's right up there with the highest levels of my concern, along with the security of this country.
So I want to leave time for questions, and I'm sure with this audience there are several, but let me ask you, I'd like to just maybe conclude my line of questioning thinking about new models for CBP, new models for the future, and the way we should be thinking about building up a 21st century architecture for the border to meet the needs of this century and centuries to come. Clearly, public-private partnerships have been talked about a lot. I believe there's new legislation that facilitates that. We've recently seen the opening of the Cross-Border Express, where in San Diego, which I know you visited, which is pretty remarkable, whereby you have the private sector, financing essentially, as I understand it, CBP operations. There are new models coming where public models, for example, you mentioned OTAI East. The whole concept of OTAI East, as many of you know, there are brochures out there, is to create a joint inspection facility, regulated traffic where traffic flows are controlled with toll roads and technology and a lot of innovations, but where essentially the public sector, the California authorities, will finance the construction of the capital costs and will look to the federal government to provide some of the staffing or most of the staffing costs. How important are these models, and what is it what other kinds of models are you considering, and how open is the agency to exploring more of these models to meet the infrastructure need that's clearly not being met?
So the two models that are really the ones that will have the most impact in the future on us, one is technology improvements. Whether you look at smart gates for travel, whether you look at the biometric exit experiments going on right now in Atlanta, facial comparison in San Ysidro, the experiment with iris scanning, et cetera. This is all about the use of improved technology to increase border security, but also increase the rapidity of the flow of people coming through. So one is technology. The other is going to be the private sector partnerships. And if you think about global entry is all fee-based. All of the personnel at CBP that work on global entry and process global entry are paid for not out of taxpayer dollars, but out of that $100 fee for 5 years that people pay. When I meet with those that are already engaged in the public-private partnership, where they're actually paying us for additional overtime hours, people, whether it's at John Wayne Airport or whether it's in Philadelphia for additional agriculture inspectors for additional time, if we're open and transparent about, they tell us, here's what we need, here's when we need it, and we say, here's what we can provide, and here's what it will cost you. The private sector organizations and those footing the bill that I have met with have been very positive about that, because they know exactly what they're getting, and quite frankly, it's the cost of doing business.
And do you find under your tenure, do you find the agency open to new models that are being brought forward? What is the way you approach or evaluate the viability of these new models?
Well, I think, change in any large organization, whether it's a government organization or, frankly, whether it's one of our large or private sector companies in the country, the change, what do they say? The only person that likes change is a wet baby. And so change can always be a bit difficult. But if you look at the Trade Enforcement and Facilitation, or Trade Facilitation and Enforcement Act, the amount of enforcement that's going on anti-dumping, intellectual property rights, those kinds of protections. We have a lot of innovative, smart, dedicated people. I mean, when I leave at the end of the year, I'm going to look back on the 3 years that I will have served as a confirmed commissioner and look back at the talent, the educational level, the expertise within the organization. And frankly, I think it'll be part of our DNA to be innovative, to be open to ideas, and well, many of you know the people that you work with at CBP now. We get very high marks from a lot of the private sector folks for the work that we do.
Thank you. Let me just conclude with one last question, since you alluded to your tenure coming to an end, about the issue of continuity. Obviously, we're in an election cycle. There will be a new president in January of 2017. obviously, depending on the outcome of that election, and I know you don't want to wade into politics, but there is one, obviously, outcome that would potentially have very different consequences for the U.S.-Mexico relationship in particular. How do you think about, for lack of a better word, locking in or ensuring the ongoing continuity and viability? There's so much effort has been spent and invested over the last 8 years to promote some of these pilot projects, these preclearance initiatives, these innovations. How vulnerable is this robust policy agenda to being undone by the outcome of an election, either on the United States side, or, by the way, in Mexico, there's an election coming up as well where there are candidates that theoretically could have a very different view of the U.S.-Mexico relationship. So how vulnerable is CBP to political meddling, and what can be done to ensure the continuity of some of these innovations that so many have worked so hard to promote, to bring about this new relationship with Mexico?
So, one, I'm not naive about these issues, and number two, I've been around for a very long time and had a very long career in government and leading large organizations. I would tell you that massive change to reverse the issues of transparency, trust, cooperation, exchanges of information, both on the security side, but also on the cargo side. I would tell you that massive change to go back the other way is essentially undoable. It is not going to happen. These things, not just for change in elected officials, but for the fact that our countries need these things. We want to improve the economy, the ability for young people to have a better educational system in which to grow up in. And I would see this by far the vast majority of people, 60,000 people in CBP, are career people. And I look at the leadership of our Deputy Commissioner, Kevin McAleenan. I look at Todd Owen as an Assistant Commissioner. Look at Brenda Brockman-Smith as an Assistant Commissioner for Trade. I look at the emphasis that Congress on both sides of the aisle has put in this. I only see the progress increasing.
Thank you. That's good to hear. We've got a couple minutes for some questions. I know that this is not a shy audience. Let's see if we can find some folks right here in the back. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. My name is Stephen Zonizer. I'm a research economist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, studying Mexico trade. I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about how things are progressing with the automated commercial environment, ACE, and how that is affecting U.S.-Mexico trade.
So we're very excited about ACE being the single window for not only all of the different federal government agencies to see how cargo is being and importations and eventually and exports too, but how this is being done in a day in which we're not using paper, we're not using faxes, we're not getting signatures in blue ink. 46 different federal agencies that all have to come together, and the fact is that the private sector stakeholders are also very interested in this, because when that commerce doesn't come in on time, when it gets held up at a port, they want to know, one, where is it being held up? They want to know, two, why is it being held up? And they want to know, three, how do I get it unstuck and get it moving back through the system? So as of this morning, Maria Luisa can tell you quite directly, because she looks at these numbers every single day, 92% of our records were going through the ACE system. And I can see our partner government agencies staying right on board to get this moving. So I'm very excited about ACE, and as most of you know too, Mexico has had a single window for quite some period of time. So we're excited about what's going to be done. And then in the future, not only how do you use ACE with our own stakeholders and our own partner government agencies, How do you use that ACE system with portals and information for with foreign government partners too? So exciting time for ACE. It's been around a multi-billion dollars of technological investment over many, many years, and the president's executive order said you have to pull this off by the end of this year, and frankly, I'm confident that we are going to pull it off by the end of this year.
Terrific. Other questions? James?
Mr. Commissioner, James Clark, Smart Border Coalition of San Diego, Tijuana. Two actually requests before the end of the year. These go for Century Global Entry. As you're aware, we have more than 305,000 people just in the San Diego area registered for these programs. Many of us couldn't do our jobs without it. Most of us couldn't do our jobs. There are two things. One, it is when we register a new car. So it can take up to 6 weeks to get that approval. Cars don't smuggle, people smuggle. But it is really hard on people who cannot buy a new car unless they trade in the old car. Some of us can do that, but that's something that we really need to have changed. The other thing is it would be really good to have a local ombudsman. Some people are just get the rejection, you're rejected for this, no reason, the last thing on the box. Others will have their card lifted, and it can take a long time for that to get a hearing. We need someone at the local level, at the OTI office perhaps, who can sit down with the person and make a direct recommendation, direct to Williston, Vermont, to get the card back. It's essential for most of our lives.
I agree. I'm almost certain that Pete Flores has fixed the car issue, or is in the process of fixing the car issue, because it has been brought up to us before, and it certainly makes a good point. I want to tell you, and Maria Luisa will get back with you, that I think the car issue has been fixed. The second thing would be, you're exactly right, because on global entry and other things, if people are denied, there is a process. There is something that can be done to get people back into the system, or to find out why they were rejected. And we see that used pretty regularly. If you're thinking about we need a person then because of just the vast number of people in San Diego at the local level, we can certainly look at that also. As you know, we've temporarily assigned, I think, close to 80 different people from around the country to staff up San Ysidro, just because the volume is so significant in travel and trade, and we don't have enough people. But we haven't, during the winter, we didn't find too many people that didn't volunteer to go to San Diego. Yeah.
More people are going south,
Yeah.
wanting to go to Baja California.
Good point.
Great. Let's take one last question, then we'll wrap up right there in the back.
Aaron Rosen, the Bank of Tokyo. Thank you, Commissioner, for your comments. I had a question about illegal narcotics. Considering the unyielding U.S. demand for illicit narcotics, I was wondering if current U.S. federal policy is beneficial for U.S.-Mexican border security. If not, what might you recommend as an alternative? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think that the issue of any changes to legislation on what is legal, what isn't legal, et cetera, at the federal level is certainly something that's that would be within Congress. But I think that what we've kind of failed to recognize is that our rhetoric in the past has always been about production countries, such as Colombia or at times Mexico, transit countries, such as Guatemala, and then consumer countries, such as the United States. And over the last, certainly since when I was the President's drug policy advisor, but even before that, I think we've kind of rejected those definitions as kind of meaningless definitions. Every country has a drug problem, including consumption. Whether or not a drug is produced in one country and transited through another, we're kind of all in this. We're all in this together. What I think people don't recognize, for instance, is that cocaine use in the United States since 2007 is somewhat down by half. If I was standing here as Tom Frieden from the CDC and told you that cancer is down by 50% in the United States, you'd stand up and applaud. Cocaine use and cocaine consumption and our appetite for cocaine in this country is down significantly. We're seeing an increase in heroin, but of course we've also seen an increase in prescription opioids that aren't coming across the border, that aren't being manufactured in another country and being smuggled in, but are coming right from our own doctors, our own pharmacies, our own hospitals. These are the most highly taxed, highly regulated drugs in the United States, and yet we're not very capable of keeping them out of the hands of people who would abuse them or people who have become addicted to them. So I think that the advice that, I never talk about the advice I gave the president, as the advice, though, that I've said quite publicly would be on the drug issue, that we need to recognize that, one, we are all in this together, that we need to spend as much time or, frankly, more time and money on prevention. We need to make treatment available to people who need treatment. We need to recognize that treatment works and people can recover. And, frankly, we need to make sure that we're doing a strong enforcement posture when it comes to drug smugglers, drug financiers, drug cartel organizations. But the cartel criminal enterprises, including those in Mexico, will be engaged in any illegal activity that they can that is going to make them a profit, whether it's human smuggling, drug smuggling, or some other type of crime. So thank you all very much. It's wonderful to be back with you. Next year I'll be in the audience and
actually,
and then I'm going to ask hard questions.
Commissioner, before you go, precisely because we are coming up on the end of the administration, just on behalf of the Wilson Center and this audience, which cares very much about the issues you work on every day, we want to thank you for your leadership and your public service. And please join me in thanking Commissioner Kerlikowske for his presentation.
Thanks.
And his service generally.
Next up is lunch. Lunch will be across the hall in the dining room. It may take a minute to make it through because we have a buffet that's sort of at the entrance there. So please make your way in there and enjoy it. It's a networking lunch. We'll have a few short remarks, but not a major speech.